Shalom, Shalom Aleichem. The Sicha of Tazria Beis, wow, that's a heavy one. And originally the Sicha was very, very, very long. Just to give you some perspective, just how many pages this is, just goes on and on and on. This was the unedited version of the Sicha. Over 3 different Farbrengens. I'm just speeding through. It's a tremendous amount of content, and there's. I'm not going to go through all the content that didn't make it into the Sicha, because I believe that's hours of content. We'll just give some general nekudas. We've seen before that pretty much whenever the Rebbe is making a siyum, there's a reason for it, and it's usually a yard site. So we've seen before siyumim on the Rebbe's father's yard site Chaf Av. And that's what this was. This was Chaf Av Tav Shin Lamed Zayin 1977, the 33rd yard site of his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. So the Rebbe starts off and says like this: it's a minhag to make a siyum. And because we spoke about Paraduma, and the atonement that comes through Karbanis, etc. So therefore, let's talk something, and Karbanis will make a siyum on Seder Kachim, one of the 6 Sfarim of Kachim. One of the 6 Starim of Mishnah. Zdaim, Mayit, Nashim, Nizikin, Kachim, Taras. Now, there's not a lot of Masechtas in the Gemara on Kachim, but there is Mishnayos. The Rebbe said the idea of a siyum is not chas v'shalom that you finish something, but rather, as we say on Simchas Torah, when we call up the Chas Bereshis, Chas Torah, that maskifin aschala la'shlama, we're starting. We take the beginning right after the end, so we start Bereshis immediately after we finish V'zei Sabdacha. And what happens is you're going to learn the same thing. You don't necessarily have to go to a new topic. You're learning the same thing, but an entirely new level. Like the Rashbam, just interesting nekudas the Rebbe brings up. The Rashbam, who's the grandson of Rashi, and in Baba Basra and another Masechtas, he actually takes over Rashi, where Rashi doesn't finish his translation, his Mefarish, his Pshat, the Rashbam takes over. He's definitely not as short as Rashi. So Rashbam writes regarding Rav Ashi, not Rashi, Rav Ashi, who was the author of Talmud Bavli together with Ravina. He's the last generation, the 6th or 7th generation of Amidoim, and he was the one that wrapped up the Shas in the 700s, plus minus. So what did he say about Rav Ashi? The first Rav Ashi made a first edition, a Madura Kama of Shas, of Gemara. And that took 30 years. And then there was a second edition for not 30, that took another 30 years. I believe Rabbi Ashi lived 120 years. He lived a very long life. Now he says the Madura Basra, the second edition, wasn't a different topic. It was the same thing. Zizel Be'inyan that he learned previously. But Demol Hoteres Toske learned, he learned it with a whole new level. Ein Arech. Similar to the difference between Bavli and Yerushalmi, like we know that Abzeda fasted 100 fasts or 40 fasts, different versions. So you could forget Talmud Bavli and upgrade to Talmud Yerushalmi, which he considered a higher level because it's Torah of Eretz Yisrael. So you see the idea that you don't have to go to new content, but just the learning itself can be a whole new level. So the Rebbe says the siyum of Seder Kachim is, the last Masechta, is Kinim. Even though on Maseches Kinim there's no Gemara, there are, however, Mefarshim on the Masechta. And that's all part of Torah Shabbat Peh. Torah Shabbat Peh is not only Talmud Bavli, it's also Mishnayos and also the Mefarshim. And the Mefarshim on the Maseches Kinim spread over to the whole world. So they're literally part of Torah Shabbat Peh itself. So let's make a siyum on the final Mishnah of Maseches Kinim, which is the Mishnah that obviously the Sicha was based on. just a few nekudas, at least for the beginning of the Sicha, because at least I struggled at the beginning of the Sicha to actually make sense. So the Rebbe gives a premise. We're talking about a woman who gives birth and then she's poor. Because had she been wealthy, she wouldn't be giving birth. She would be giving more. The whole idea of kinim is somebody who cannot afford behemoth animals. And therefore they're bringing doves, turtle doves, etc. And this poor woman, poor as in financially poor, makes a neder and she decides, I'll have to bring another nest, another group of birds. So then she has to bring two sets, one for the neder and one for the obligation. And then everything we learned about various circumstances that could take place that she can eventually bring Allah. Then the Rebbe asks the questions that we know from the Sicha. What's the flow? What's the flow from that to the next point, and that is Zehu Sha'amdu from Rabbi Yeshua, and what's the flow from that until the last Nikuda of Talmidei Chachamim, Rabbi Shimon ben Akashi Emer, that the Ziknei Amaretz, the older of Amaretz, get older and they lose their mind weakens, and the Talmidei Chachamim Misyasheves, their mind settles. It's a much more settled, wholesome, logical, balanced mind. So the Rebbe explains that flow. Just want to focus on a few more nekudas. I found what I was looking for. When the Rebbe started the answer, the Rebbe gave a Hagdama. He gave an interesting introduction. He says like this: in general, there's a principle when it comes to explaining Mishnayos, and also when it comes to explaining Gemara. As oib, so that's if it's just something that's like a nice pilpul, it's a nice discussion, but there's no practical halacha l'maisa. So then you could offer your own interpretation. Everybody's open interpretation. You find a nice medrash, you want to give an interpretation on the medrash, mazel tov. Obviously within the realms of Torah, not just absolute garbage, but it's pretty flexible. Any one of us could go through the parsha and share a cute word. However, when it comes to halacha, you can't share a cute word. It's either halacha or it's not halacha. And the Rebbe says you see this by Maseches Avos. Pirkei Avos is not a Masechta of halacha. It's a Masechta of menschlichkeit. That'll be a mensch. And therefore, Maseches Avos hot oiv zich hamoim pirushim. Maseches Avos has an incredible amount of commentary. There's no Masechta that has as many pirushim as Maseches Avos. I don't know. I didn't know that. The first pirush of Maseches Avos is from the Tanoim itself. Avos to Rab Nosson, and over there you bring pirushim of Tanoim on Maseches Avos. You don't have that on Mishnayos. You have any other Mishnayos. You have Amoraim, which are the Gemara sages on Mishnayos. In Avos, you have Tanoim commentating on fellow Tanoim's Pirkei Avos. And nevertheless, you find, even though that you have Tanoim, the commentating on Maseches Avos, you nevertheless have other opinions. You have Talmidei Rashi, quoted in Machzor Vitri, who was the great student of Rashi, and in Pirushim Mishnayos Rambam, and other Pirushim that disagree. Why? Even though, how could you argue with Tanoim? Because it's not halacha. It's a vart. It's a Nakuda you want to explore. Fine, explore it. And we see in every generation, the Nafs Zetman Yedidot, even Achrein, basically till our time, more and more Pirushim Maseches Avos, and the Pirushim are accepted, and they spread out to all the world. I mean, each year, tons of Pirushim come out of Pirkei Avos. What's the pshat? Because it's not negeh halacha, and if it was regarding halacha, chas v'shalom, you could change halacha. Over here, you're just offering another pshat. And over there, there's many Pirushim on that you could offer. And it's flexible. The Rebbe says, so much so that it says in Kisvei Harizal that because Torah was given to every neshama of Yidden, And there are 600,000 general neshamas. And then, as we learned in Tanya in the past few weeks, each neshama has multiple sparks of it, but the 600,000 general thing. Perek Lamed Zayin, right, last week. So therefore, there's 600,000 pshatim in pshat, remez, dudush, and soid. It looks like in each one, on each thing in Torah. And that's why you can have so many different pshatim on Pirkei Avos, because it's different brains, different ways of seeing it. Even though who could compare to Rashi, and Tosfos Yom Tov, etc. Because we see that even Achronim are comfortable, people of the recent generations are comfortable to argue, or not argue, but offer a different insight. So therefore, you can do it as well. Regarding to our topic, because on the questions that the Rebbe asked, the Rebbe says we find no other pshat. And it's an amazing, it's a gavaldik akash, it's an incredible question. The question, what's the connection between Zeru, Sha'amdu, Keli Echad? What's the point of the thing? We could have brought an example of Yerusha, as he said, etc. So therefore, we're forced to, you have to explain the Mishnah in a whole different way. In other words, almost like the Rebbe is giving legitimacy, because there's no mefarish on this Mishnah, to take the pshat of the Mishnah totally differently. That there is a nafkamina, that there is a difference, etc. As the Rebbe continued in the Sicha. There's many, many, many other points that didn't make it into the Sicha. There's also a recording of most of this Farbrengen. It was a weekday, I believe. Chafav, not the second, but not the last little parts, but the majority of the Sicha is from the Chafav Farbrengen. And l'chaim l'shalom. We should all lahagdol Torah v'yadeh.